Welcome to the Families in Canada podcast. On today's episode, we're going to talk about homelessness in Canada, which affects 235,000 Canadians each year. Today we have Jane and Melissa on the show to talk about their experiences. I'll give it to you, Jane.
My name's Jane Bernard. My story starts early. It goes back to when I was about 8 years old. Around that time, my parents were in the middle of a divorce, and I ended up turning to food for comfort. After a few months, that turned into drinking, and by the age of 12, I started having a drinking problem. By age 14, I bought weed on the street, and then not long after, I started using harder drugs. Going back to the beginning, it started by raiding my grandfather's liquor cabinet, and then with no fear of being arrested or ripped off, I was scoring drugs on the street. Getting high gave me a brief escape from my overwhelming feelings of sadness, confusion, abandonment. Eventually, the consequences caught up with me, and this kind of became a bigger problem than the actual addiction that I was trying to cope with. By the age of 18, I was booted out of school for selling illegal drugs. I started using my part-time jobs as hideouts for drug dealing. I was jailed for stealing a truck. I was busted with $13,000 worth of marijuana in my possession. I did jail time for driving under suspension. Eventually, I left Kenora, Ontario, trying to create a new life for myself. That town is a little bit northwest of Thunder Bay, where I grew up. I went to Sudbury, where I found a job selling everything from trinkets and toys to kitchenware and computers. I ended up becoming a top salesman. My door-to-door expertise took me with the same company to Oshawa, Hamilton. In the meanwhile, I became too weak to overcome my addictions. My appetite for crack cocaine increased, and my drug cocktail now included heroin. Following a promotion, I moved to Barrie, Ontario. I created a business that soon crumbled due to my cocaine binges. Devastated financially and psychologically, I ingested a hazardous amount of unfamiliar pills with the intent to end my life. After a brief hospital stay, I was back to drinking whiskey and smoking crack. I eventually returned to Kenora, and I became a cook's apprentice at Best Western Hotel. It wasn't long before I was arrested for assault while trying to claim a drug debt. I was fired and thrown in prison. But jail was always kind of safe for me. You know, I had no bills to pay, no worries. I was fed and clothed. This time it was different. I was 27 at the time, and I started kind of reflecting on the mess that I was in. I had to put the need to use drugs above everything else, including my important relationships, and I knew I had to get clean. After my release, I detoxed. I enrolled in the Salvation Army's Anchorage Addictions program in Ottawa.
Thanks so much, Jane, for showing us what you've been through. I really want to highlight the importance of what you went through to get to this point and explain where you are today. So I was wondering if you could break down the big things that happened to you, what social norms kind of were implemented in your life without you knowing it that really caused the downward spiral, and how we can highlight these and try and spread awareness so that we can help others and just showcase what you've taught us through your experiences.
Well, I think one of the major things that happened was my parents' divorce. And I'm not trying to blame them for what happened to me, but I know that it affected me mentally a lot. I felt very neglected. I wasn't comfortable, and I wasn't trusting anyone. I was kind of forced to sit back and watch my parents fall apart.
Yeah, and I know how tough that can be on you. You're only at the age of 12 and you ended up turning to food for comfort and you started binge eating. And I know this happens a lot in children who don't really have much to do and they just see or they're affected in such a negative way by their parents. And a lot of kids that do binge eat find it uncomfortable to go and socialize with others. They find going to school really difficult. And you can see that when you weren't really trusting anybody because you weren't comfortable. So I know a few things could lead to this. Do you know anything more about it?
Well, looking back on myself at that age, and I mean, knowing the things that I know now, I can definitely see that I was a depressed, anxious kid. I felt, very, very guilty. I felt ashamed of myself. I somehow felt like my parents' separation was my fault. Um,
Yeah, that's something really hard to get through. And for anybody out there listening to this, just want you to know there are numerous ways to find help and that you don't always have to turn to food to comfort. You have teachers there to help you. You have your peers, find someone who you trust, who you can look up to, who you consider a role model.
I mean, absolutely. That's why I'm sitting here today, is to kind of tell people what the world can be like for others, and I guess put things into perspective for a lot of people, kind of show people, I don't want to say what not to do, but yeah.
So at the age of 14, you were in high school. I'm assuming like that's that age, and you got involved with marijuana. So when looking at marijuana in teenagers, you kind of look at the 5 W's. It was very easy to get because everyone's doing it in high school. And that's how it becomes a norm because you don't necessarily feel pressured to do it, but the choice is always available to you. Anything you want to highlight about this?
I mean, I feel like getting high was a way for me to kind of, I guess, feel something, feel something other than sadness or confusion or abandonment. So I think that's one of the main reasons why I started smoking.
You also talked about how you had easy access to liquor from your grandfather's cabinets in his home. And this just goes to show that when you see your family or your elders doing something, you can also follow in their footsteps very easily. It kind of opens a door for you that, once again, like with the marijuana, it gives you a choice. Not that you feel pressured into doing it, but it's something there for you. You see other people doing it. It's just always a temptation, one would say. So at the age of 18, you didn't only partake in drugs, but you also started selling them. Any reason why you remember you started this?
Well, first of all, since everyone was kind of doing it, it was easy money. Also, as, benign as it sounds, it was kind of a way to pass the time, get out of the house kind of thing.
And so as addiction does increase, you get used to the feeling and you don't feel that high anymore, which is why I'm assuming you started dabbling in crack cocaine and heroin.
I mean, that's pretty much exactly what happened.
And then from there, it's kind of where your downward spiral went down. Like, you financially lost everything due to your addiction. That can include a car, a home, modes of transportation, food. And this not only like financially impacted you, but also psychologically impacted you because it made you blind to the decisions that you were making. You couldn't think it fully through. You weren't really helping yourself. You were just feeding the addiction because that was your number one priority. So, shortly after you were financially unstable and psychologically impaired to all that you were doing, you then attempted to end your life. So I had one question for you. You tried to overdose on medication, and it says that you only briefly stayed at the hospital. So do you think that you didn't receive enough help from the hospital?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like people who are working in hospitals at this point have become desensitized to people attempting suicide. They didn't really do anything to try to help my mental state. It was just a matter of, pump out her stomach and get her out of here so that we don't have to deal with her anymore.
So you feel as though if you had a mental diagnosis, you could have been available to more help that could have gotten you better, put you in some programs that were funded by the government, anything along those lines. Like the hospital could have done more, the government could have helped you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah.
Then you were put into jail, which really cut you off from the drugs and put a hold on your addiction, and you said you had time to reflect in there. So what do you think that told you about yourself and like what the outcome of your addictions did?
I mean, of course it shows that I really didn't have control over myself anymore. I couldn't take care of myself. Even if I knew what I was doing wasn't good, I couldn't stop it. So that's why it took an outside force to kind of cut me off cold turkey and get me out of that hole that I'd gotten myself in.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Jane. I really hope that by looking at this, we can find the factors that may lead to homelessness, and your story will definitely help others out there.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
So now we have Melissa to share her story of her homelessness in Canada. It deals with a young couple, so it gives you a different look to it. Here you go, Melissa.
Hi, my name is Melissa. My husband's name is Sean. We're a young couple in our early 20s. We have 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, and we live in London. I've had problems with housing instability since I was 16 years old. Non-payment of rent, illegal boarders, illegal activities are some of the reasons for this. Our first experience of homelessness was in December of 2006. Due to non-payment of rent, my family and I moved to a homeless shelter for families in London. Living in a shelter is extremely hard. You find yourself following rules you may have never had and listening to and feeling that you have to answer to staff. 6 people living in one room is very tight, and you have to try and get along with the other families. Your children's behaviors and attitudes quickly change. Trying to concentrate on fixing your own life is all very hard and upsetting. My family was in shelter for 70 days until we found housing. We are now a part of the Hostel to Homes pilot project, which I think is an excellent program because of the one-to-one action you can receive. It's very supporting. The neighborhood we moved to, which I have learned is one of the worst in London, has group fights, drug use, distribution, problematic neighbors. My husband had some challenges with the use of crack, and at one point he was doing crime to feed his habit. Eventually he was caught, and because of the property he stole, it was found in my home. I was charged too. My husband and I had huge fights due to his drug use, and eventually one night it turned into a physical argument. All in one day, it kind of felt like everything fell apart. I'd also tried to help someone else in the community, but this backfired on me, and I received an eviction notice for having a boarder I should not. Because of this, I had a meeting with my community support worker and my children's aid worker, since my husband was hiding the whole time in the attic, as we had a non-association order in place due to his assault. But my so-called friend went to my workers and told them a bunch of lies, and I lost my mind. I became angry. I had a problem with this individual's family members while in shelter, and I felt that there would be consequences to my home and myself. My husband was arrested the same day and taken to jail for the assault on me. My 7-year-old daughter said to my community support worker that if someone tried to hurt her mom again, she was going to call 911. What an eye-opener. My worker said this was enough and we needed to get away and return to shelter for safety reasons. 3 weeks after staying in the shelter again and facing several behavior issues with my boys, we returned to our unit and faced the same problems with the neighborhood. At this point, I was facing another eviction for illegal activities for what I have already described. My husband had returned from jail after a couple of months, and I am now proud to say he is receiving help for his addiction issues from Thames Valley Addiction Services. I am also happy to say that our application for a new place is accepted with the help of our workers. It is in a new area of London. We now have been in our new place for 4 days. Huge differences. You can look at your window and not see people lingering around, no group fights, no kids playing out until 11 p.m., no drug-addicted pupils knocking on your door asking for a light. I'm happy here. My children are happy here. I see a change in them in every way already, and it's only been 4 days. The neighborhood's clean and quiet, and the kids are nicely behaved rather than ignorant and troublemaking. I wish I could stay involved with these supports forever, but eventually you have to grow up and do the right thing. Realize who's important and who's not, what's right from wrong, what needs to be paid, such as your rent and bills. It's all common sense. I hope for my sake and my family's that we all stay on the right path with the right friends.
Thanks, Melissa, for sharing your story with us. Now, if you don't mind, just like we did with Jane, we're going to go back and see what factors really were the root problem that led to your homelessness in Canada, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you and your husband were a young couple, are a young couple. And young couples face a lot of issues. One that we saw was money issues. So, as a young couple, your careers are just starting off. The wage you're receiving is not very high, and it should be going to paying off rent and bills, major and minor household expenses. But you had a past, and you didn't really know how to pay your bills or do any of that stuff. So, could you say that your old habits from your childhood experiences really impacted how you live your life now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't feel like it was really necessary to pay my rent in a way. I was comfortable with legal activities and my husband's addiction. I didn't really feel like something was wrong. Obviously, this led to the physical abuse, and my fear for my children's well-being. My kids saw all of this, and my sons were facing behavioral issues.
And then that maybe went back to you and your husband having communication issues. You might have been wanting to spend more time together, but you could have been busy with your work schedules and other pressures that you were facing.
I mean, yeah, we were young, we were still young. A lot of the things were changing in our lives, and obviously we kind of took it out on each other.
And for such a young couple, you, I guess, had a priority for having kids, and at such a young age, that causes distance between parents.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely weren't ready for the responsibility of the kids and the house and also having each other. It was a lot happening at once, and prioritizing became a problem because it felt at times that we had to kind of choose between each other or the kids.
And not even just that, but your husband was addicted to drugs, and he put that above his family, and that jeopardized you on multiple occasions with the eviction notices. And especially when you have 4 kids, you need to be a duo, right? You have to have each other's backs and always support each other, and that can be really hard when the other person's not pulling their end of the weight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you talked about your experiences when you first got moved to London. So when you were trying to get out of the homeless shelter, they tried to help you, and they put you in one of the low-income homes, which is how people try and get back up on their feet. But you found it very problematic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, as I said before, fights, drugs, my neighbors were problematic, to say the least. And it kind of felt like while we and other people in that area were trying to start over, the environment was kind of setting us back.
And that could have made you spiral right back into becoming homeless again, getting involved in the drugs as your husband did before. So that's the issue that we see in the government system, where they're trying to help you, but the actual area is setting you back, and maybe they aren't aware of what's happening.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Melissa, for sharing your story with us.
Yeah.
It really goes to show that young couples and families in Canada, like the podcast name, are going through many things, and it's really important to bring light to these issues so that they are heard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for providing this platform for us.
Also, thank you, Jane, for your story earlier today. I hope you all learned something. Tune in next Friday at 3 p.m. where we will be talking about intimate relationships in Canada. Thanks so much, and have a great evening.